The Shop to the Apartment. Written and read by W.P. Thrift. You can find me at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. Chapter 3. Chillin' at the Apartment. A plain white van with no windows pulls up outside of a playground in the park. The driver, a middle-aged balding man in a stained green trench coat, peers out at the children playing, reaching for his binoculars. Not feeling them, he looks over towards the cup holder he could have sworn he put them in. They're not there. He looks into the back of the van. The back two seats are missing, as he took them out to free up all the room in the back. Only a few rolls of electric tape and a crowbar are back there. Cursing to himself, he turns off the van and gets out, before walking over to the fence to get a closer look that way, wondering if anyone can see him from behind the shrubbery on the other side of the fence. He didn't take the keys with him, because there were no keys. Just turning the ignition cranks the van up. It was very old and had been spliced back together several times, before it was eventually sold for scrap, at which point he had picked it up for $250. He starts walking down the length of fence, but before he can get too far, he hears the van crank up behind him. He turns back quickly and sees a guy with a rough 5 o'clock shadow that looks even seedier than he does, slamming the door shut while driving off in his van. He runs after it for a bit, but it rounds a corner and he quickly loses sight of it. That's not good for him, because the owner of that van was wanted by the police for questioning, so there was no way for him to let anyone know it had been stolen. Peter drove along in his brand-new van. Well, brand new to him. The piece of crap clunker had definitely had all of its best days behind it. Plain white, no windows, and now that he looked through the rearview mirror, which was broken off and laying on the dashboard, he could see that there were several bullet holes in the right side sliding door. Either way, this solved his transportation problem. He was starting to work today, and needed some way to get to all of his jobs across town. At this point, he had managed to pick up 15 different jobs. It was his goal to save up the money needed to get to New York as fast as possible. Splitting all bills between 5 people living at the apartment would allow him to do this even faster. First, Peter had his early morning job, delivering fresh ingredients to Mr. and Mrs. Bunn's bakery, named Tons of Buns. Then there was his second morning job, bellman at some hotel. Then there was his 11sies job, working as a Southside Cattellville volunteer firefighter. Next came his lunchtime job, lifeguard at a local beach, or at least a place so affectionately called a beach by the locals, which was actually a large swamp runoff where the muddy banks were too unstable for any property to be built on. But the children love swimming out there, so for the sake of all the children that have survived the crocodile attack so far, the city got together a budget for lifeguards. Next came his afternoon tea job, working as a valet for a different hotel than his earlier bellman job. Finally, there was his nearly night job, delivering cigarettes to the Circle M. Come night, he had freelance work, including tonight's gig, delivering methamphetamines, also to the Circle M. And all of that was only his Monday schedule. He'd be starting the rest of his jobs tomorrow, so Peter's schedule was quite full. Peter had planned to take his time enjoying the scenic route to work, but police sirens appearing in his rearview mirror, still on the front dash, made him sigh. He'd have to speed up to get to work now, and also to outrun the cops. Radix awoke in the middle of the afternoon on the couch and flipped on the TV. He could hear Lantis shuffling in the kitchen, followed by him gnawing on a loaf of bread. A gradually increased whimpering sound came from him out of pure joy of actually waking up and finding food. The first thing on TV that Radix found was a fake TV judge show, which he flipped away from, only for Lantis to yell at him to turn back. Radix refused, hating shows like that. "Say, weren't we supposed to be getting jobs?" Lantis asked, walking into the living room holding a chunk of bread that he had torn off from the loaf. Flicking a lighter several times, he lit up a cig. "Go to the front porch if you're going to do that," Radix told him. "We don't want the apartment getting stunk up like the old shop did." "What do you care?" "I don't, but Peter does, and he can kick us all out of here." Lantis went to the sliding glass door, opened it, and sat on Peter's reading stool while staring back into the apartment, leaving the glass door open so that the smoke smell still crept back in anyway. "If you're waiting for me to turn back to that judge show, then keep waiting," Radix told him. "It's not that. I'm just wondering what we're actually going to do about the job situation," Lantis said. "You, of all people, seriously care about that?" Radix asked. "I just don't want to end up back in the woods, is all," Lantis said. "Or worse." "Didn't you grow up there?" "You never realize how much a place sucks until you leave it behind." "Well, fair enough. Why did you leave, anyway?" Lantis reflected back. The last week he had spent in the woods was coming back to him as a desperate, terrifying time. The entire pack of direwolves had just been his pack, his family, the matron who led the pack, which he had always thought of as his own mother. All he could recall was pain and blood, and a terrible dark shadow being cast over him. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to push those memories away. The normally calming, but now chilling, voice of Mr. Roosty came back to him. "Just run away from here! Buck, buck. You must survive, or everything I've done will be for naught! Buck, buck." He saw Mr. Roosty being rapidly drug away from him, so fast it was like he vanished. But the leaves being kicked up all around. But it wasn't Mr. Roosty being drug away, he realized. His mind was confused. He recalled something grabbing his leg, dragging him rapidly away from the place he had called home for so long. Lantis blinked, back to the present. The cig he had been smoking had burned all the way down to the filter, so he tossed the butt into the pot of a plant Peter had recently placed in here, before pulling out another cig and lighting it up. He took a long drag off of it. "I'm sorry. What was the question again?" Lantis asked. "Never mind," Radix replied. Lantis looked out the window stretching all the way around the patio. Seeing the clear blue sky overhead, he began to wonder where the dark cloud which had always loomed overhead had gone, the shadow which had haunted him for so long. Perhaps it assumed he was still in prison, and with his location theoretically not in flux, it felt free to roam around the planet looking for others to torment. It was weird for Lantis to actually feel freed from that terrifying specter, but even weirder was the fact that it didn't make him feel any safer. Perhaps it was because he knew that it could return at any moment, unexpectedly, exactly the way it had first come into his life. It came in, there was so much blood, pain, and violence, and then he fled for a week through the woods, until his starvation made him risk approaching another person. Miranda, the girl that would hand him off to Bowman and Radix, and the whole computer repair shop fiasco would begin. He was free from that dark shadow now, at least temporarily, and also free to go about his life, however he saw fit. But, for lack of any idea what to do with himself, he opted to keep hanging around with Bowman and Radix. On a brighter note, all three of them were out of their prison uniforms now. Peter had gone to a charity clothing store, and the employees took one look at Peter before they all cried out, "You poor thing, and offered up anything he wanted for free to him. He insisted he wasn't here for himself, but rather for his housemates. The few boxes of clothing he had brought back with him had exactly what everyone wanted. Lantis was back in a Hawaiian shirt and cargo shorts. No shoes, though, as he hated wearing anything on his feet. Side note, Peter also loved to go barefoot, so he was already feeling like kindred spirits with Lantis. Radix was back in a red hoodie, and he didn't care what else he wore besides that. Peter still made him put on pants, though. And Bowman had jeans and a t-shirt on, when they were lucky. Most of the time when he left his room, he wore nothing but tighty-whities. Or at least, he did until Radix pointed out that he was becoming just like his dad. Bowman had panicked, crying out,
"Oh no! Next I'll be getting boozed up and watching the same shitty porno all day long on VHS!"
And in a blind panic, he ran to put back on some more clothes. Of course, Bowman still had his goggles on. He never took them off, no matter what. His eyes must never be seen. That was particularly troubling when Bowman went to take a shower. Too many times now, someone else had gone into the bathroom to find Bowman unconscious in the shower, suffocated by the plastic bag he had to rubber band around his neck to keep his goggles from getting wet. This had yet to kill him, at least, but his roommates were starting to get ticked off at seeing him naked, lying sprawled out, unconscious, spread eagle in the shower at least once a day. So, while he did so with indignity in his voice, he agreed to work on waterproofing his goggles so that would stop happening. Speaking of showering, that's a second bright note to the apartment. Everyone could shower now, for once. Strangely, one incident that occurred right after Peter got out of the shower one day was stepping in a wet spot on the carpet in front of the AC. He just assumed his foot was still wet from showering, not noticing that the AC was now leaking just a little bit onto the carpet. Oh well, that was probably fine to just leave alone anyway. It's nothing that'll ever come back to bite him. But still, with the shower in the apartment very much unlike the shop, nobody smelled like death anymore, which is something that they could all preserve as long as everyone was vigilant about making sure Bowman and Lantis went outside to smoke. Speaking of Lantis and showering and the AC, that took some convincing on Peter's part. Not that Lantis was scared of water, but the AC at the end of the hallway freaked him out something fierce. He had never quite gotten used to the idea of a cooling system in a building. Peter coerced him with a stake one day, walking backwards down the hall with it, until Lantis was right next to the AC, without even realizing it. "See," Peter had told him, "it's perfectly harmless." After this, Lantis could finally put such a weird phobia behind him, but another phobia he still couldn't deal with was the fear of running out of smokes. Lantis's cargo shorts were perfect for carrying several packs of cigs with him, and he tried to keep them filled at all times. He had become more than a bit gun-shy of nicotine fits, as they were far more hammering to his sanity than he could have possibly have expected. There was a rumbling in the apartment, and a giant ball of meat, gruel, and unidentifiable gunk came rolling into the living room, pushed by Sweeney's feet as he moved through the hallway on his hands, pushing the ball backwards like a dung beetle. When it arrived next to the couch, he took a seat on the couch, and Radix was forced to move over or be crushed. Sweeney watched the TV while eating giant handfuls of the gunk by forcing it through the stitches covering his mouth. That at least explained why it needed to be mushed up like that, but there was still so much of it. When Sweeney realized Radix was staring at him, he tore off a huge hunk of pink and white gunk to offer him. Radix waved a hand to say no, but Lantis called into the living room, asking for some. Sweeney tossed the handful of gunk at him, which he caught with his free hand, but it still splattered all over his face and the window behind him. Lantis lapped it up and seemed to enjoy it. "What is it?" Radix asked Lantis. "Meat-ish," Lantis replied. Radix was about to change his mind and ask for some, until he saw all the bugs crawling on it and burrowing beneath it. Radix had settled the TV on a nature show, and watching a lion chase and kill a lame zebra seemed to pacify Sweeney, as he found it visually relaxing. "Right, so, about the job?" Lantis continued. "Are you still on about that?" Radix asked. "Is it wrong to want to help out?" Lantis asked. Radix considered this, not understanding where Lantis was coming from. "Okay, what do you really want?" Lantis acted shocked, as though his intentions were anything but altruistic. And then he sighed and admitted, "I want a computer of my own, and enough money to get Groundskeeper 3 and the latest expansions, and cover the monthly fee." Radix nodded, now finally getting where Lantis was coming from. "Well, if that's what you want, then yes, I could see a job being necessary. But for me, I was thinking, do I really need to work? Peter may get upset if I'm just here all the time, but I think I could find something to do that's not work, per se." "Like what?" Lantis asked. "Your mom would love this," Radix said, intending that statement to be a negative, and Lantis took it as such. "But I was actually thinking about going back to school." Lantis cringed. "The Cattellville Technical College of Technology, right? Where the tall boy went to school?" "Yep, that's the one," Radix replied. "Okay, hear me out. College is already easier than high school, which I've already dealt with. Because, for one thing, college has way more lax of schedule, and, of course, way more freedom for the students, right? I mean, I even hear legend that in college you're allowed to go to the bathroom whenever you need to use the bathroom. No waiting with your hand in the air for 20 minutes. Just waiting for the teacher to call on you, and even when they finally do, they'll just say no. Or, if they decide to be so merciful as to grant you their blessing to go, you need a hall pass. And if you take more than 2 minutes, they'll send the vice principal after you to accuse you of doing drugs." Lantis didn't know what to say to all of that. "It sounds like I should be glad I never went to high school, or any school." "I could definitely see the advantages of having a rooster as your personal home tutor," Radix agreed. "And believe me, I could go on and on about why college is a million times better than high school. But let me jump straight to my next point. A technical college is even easier than that, because it's not designed for spry adolescents. It's designed for old fuddy-duddies who have jobs and families and no time for school. So, the homework's less, the classes are fewer, and the teachers are mostly all stoned all the time, because they're bummed that they ended up as a technical college professor being their job." "So you're going back to school as an excuse to sit around and do nothing. But half the time that you're doing nothing will be spent at a place that isn't here, creating the illusion that you're doing something," Lantis summed up. "Exactly," Radix declared. "I actually hadn't put all my thoughts together on the matter like this before, so I'm glad we were able to hash them all out together. You know, you're not half bad to talk to when you're not bitching about MMOs." "You mean when you're doing all the talking?" "Yes, when you're not talking." That was actually good enough for Lantis. He was happy to think of himself as good at anything, whatever the reasoning may be. Bowman was sitting at his computer smoking, because of course he would ignore the house rules, when he realized something was missing. He had his nicotine, his computer. What could it be?
"Ah, yes,"
Bowman suddenly realized.
"I need caffeine."
Getting up, he headed down the hallway towards the living room, but his exit was blocked by a giant ball of gunk Sweeney had just rolled in there. There was a slight opening between the kitchen counter and the cabinets over it next to the hall, so Bowman climbed through that and went tumbling hills over head into the living room. He got up and dusted himself off. "Headed out?" Radix asked him.
Yeah, I need a soda,
Bowman declared. From all his time in prison, Radix had nearly forgotten about that. There are better things in this world to drink than toilet water. "Oh, yeah. Pick me up one while you're out," Radix asked. "And me," Lantis called over to him, still out on the patio smoking. "And, Bowman?"
What?
"I'm looking for a job. If you find one, let me know." "You know, you need a job too," Radix told Bowman, to which Bowman began to chirp.
Why me?
"Well, someone has to pay the rent," Radix said. "I'd do it, but I'll be far too busy with my higher education to work. It's important for my future, you know. If Peter found a car or something like he said he'd look for today, I'll use that to drive down and pick up the needed forms, sign up for college, bam, get all that knocked out today." Bowman frowned.
I don't feel like working. Make Peter do it. He's a bad Peter.
"Peter's never gonna be the new you, no matter how hard you try and make him be," Radix said. "So let me set things straight by saying, bad Bowman, go and get a job." Bowman frowned even harder.
You and yours.
Of course, Bowman had no money for sodas, and he knew this even as he left the apartment, and then the apartment complex entirely, to begin walking down the sidewalk towards the local grocery store, Outer Price Low. Because it would be such a hassle to steal sodas from them on and on, Bowman began to reckon that he did need to get a job. The thought was grotesque to him, a repugnant cancer of the mind that festered while sucking his spirit dry. But it was what had to be done. By the time Bowman had arrived at the grocery store, his spirit broken, he saw the Help Wanted ad outside and reluctantly picked up a job application from just inside the store to begin filling it out. That concludes Chapter 3 of The Apartment. Tune in every Tuesday for new chapters. If you would like to reach me, you can do so at Lantis Armstrong on Twitter. That's LANTISARMSTRONG. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again for next week's chapter, The Elder Chore List of Eternal Darkness.